would like to highlight His Excellency Adriatic Creazu, the Ambassador of Kosovo to Canada. Thank you so much, my friend, for being here. Also Consul Kadri Dakai of Kosovo. Sir, thank you so much for being here. As long as the NATO Association has existed, I think it's acquired good relationships with all of our NATO members and partners, and Kosovo is an important member of the NATO community. I already mentioned Catherine Langley-Hope, our Honorary Chair Emerita. I would also like to highlight Doreen Kanji, our Vice President, and also I think we've got Danny Horowitz somewhere here, our Honorary Solicitor. Thank you, Danny, for being here. But it's just to say that NATO is an amazing idea, but it's no different than how we should all act with our friends and our community. At its base, it is protecting one another. An idea of an attack upon one is an attack upon all. Most Canadians don't think about how revolutionary security is, but for most of human history, security has not been taken for granted. It has had to be hard won and fought for. It is a very, very important element that Canadians need to appreciate, to realize, and to make sure that they support. Security doesn't just happen. It doesn't just spring out of the Canadian shield. It requires work, constant effort, and yes, money as well. So I always urge those who are coming to our events to make sure that you talk to your MPs, to other people in your community, about the importance of security, that it can't be just taken for granted, that we must continue to support the institutions that are at the heart of the international rules-based order. And while that order sounds quite strange, international rules-based order, what does that mean? Well, it just means that we rule by laws, justice, and rules instead of just power. Power is still important, of course, but in human history, it has always been the main ruling element. Now, with international rules, international organizations, you've heard in the news, the ICJ, of course, is quite prominent right now, but the International Criminal Court, the UN, NATO, the Bretton Woods organizations, all of these work together as an ecosystem to try to make sure that the world is run by rules and not just by might. It's an old idea that people have always striven to get beyond that. We're just about in that position, and Canada has to be one of the countries fighting for the rules-based international. With that, I would like to introduce Ms. Gashi. She's got a wonderful, wonderful bio on the Kosovo website. And as Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs and for diaspora as well, it's something that's close to my heart as far as connecting with people and making sure that that idea of community is constantly reminded. Her bio starts that she's an executive leader, innovator, and policy analyst with experience in migration and diasporas, public and digital diplomacy, civic engagement, and advocacy. And at the heart of that is her work with as a particular executive director and founder of Germane, which was a regional nonprofit specializing in engaging diaspora communities about Kosovo's statehood and many other issues, I'm sure, but to make sure that there is that feeling of community. So I know that she understands the important interpersonal relationship that's at the basis of all diplomacy and all striving for a greater world. She managed on her own KosovoDiaspora.org, which was a crowdsourcing digital engagement and diplomacy platform. Her policy and research experience in international development, migration matters, and foreign policy spanned across international and local organizations in Kosovo. She's fluent in Albanian, English, and Spanish, and completed a Master of Public Administration at Arizona State University, and holds a bachelor's degree at Wartburg College in International Relations, Political Science, and Spanish Language and Literature. She's also a proud alumna of the United World College in Costa Rica, so obviously she is a citizen of the world, and that is one of the things we're always trying to build up here in Canada. I think she understands our issues from the multicultural point of view as well. So, Deputy Minister, most welcome.
Thank you, sir. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for taking the time to be here this morning. I think we are at a quite unique time in the world where things are moving at fast-paced societies and question their realities, and we need to find ways on how to keep at track and not take things for granted. Security often for the longest time has been taken for granted by especially societies that live in a very well-developed democracies. They undermine the power of what it means to feel free, secure in some cases, and then when reality hits hard in other parts of the world, they realize the power of what it means to invest. So I'm very much looking forward to the conversation, dwelling a bit about not just what it means to be free, but also what it means to be partnership, to build partnership, and to be able to look at situations from different lenses and grasp the reality that while we are so different, this world needs to be on a peace end by everyone, and it requires everyone's attention in having the associations or to build on also the premises of voluntarism is that regardless of what you do in your journey, you have to be able to invest back in the community. And the work that you do does not go unnoticed, because it's precisely this type of work that keeps the faith running, but also keeps us in a direction for greater. So thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Not at all. It's for me, it's something interesting. We say a lot of these words, collaboration, many points of view, trying to make sure that we are diverse in our thought. But these do actually mark us out as far as we are democracies. It really does make a difference. In the past, say, 15 years, of course, most of the West has been concerned about the rise of China and so many other autocratic leaders. This is definitely nothing new. But I think we find more and more, looking at Vladimir Putin, for instance, the kind of, what shall I say, the uselessness of that kind of autocracy when it comes to strategic thinking, to resilience, to being able to deal with things you're not expecting. Xi Jinping, Mr. Putin, these are people who have command and control over their entire economies, their entire nations. And that means that if they are not told something they don't like, they will not be ready for it. Democracies, we may be riven with strife, we may be disagreeing all the time, yelling at each other, but we are prepared for many different eventualities because of that. It is both a strength and a weakness, but I think it is, in this case, at the moment with the world as riven with different strife as it is, an advantage to us to make sure that we are prepared for many different eventualities, even those that we do not like, so that we can prepare for them. This year is the 75th anniversary of NATO. I'm not sure if any of you have seen that yet, but 1949 was the founding of the alliance. It has been part of a very important group, as I said, the suite of institutions built on the idea of non-zero sum collaboration. Everybody puts in a little bit and gets a lot more out of it. And NATO's had a lot of missions over the years, operations. Canada has always been part of every single NATO operation in the history of the alliance. It's something that I think we can all be proud of. But most Canadians don't exactly hear about those missions too much. They hear about what we did with the Blue Berets as part of the United Nations, but not necessarily about what we have done as part of NATO. The more I talk with various leaders throughout the NATO alliance, the more that we hear about the importance of the campaign in Kosovo as a high point of what NATO is and what it should be. There are many problematic operations that NATO's have, many that have caused a lot of problems in their own right as far as the attempt to solve problems is concerned. But it's been almost 25 years now since the NATO bombing of Belgrade and its surroundings after Serbs carried out war crimes in Kosovo. A lot of you may not hear about it very often. It's not something that's discussed that much in Canada, and I think it should be, because so often we say never again, and people are worried about, okay, well, we're not responding, we're not doing anything. Well, we have in the past, and it's been complicated when we do get involved, but in this specific case, it is one of those great news stories of Canadian and NATO involvement in challenging global affairs. So when 25 years ago Belgrade was carrying out war crimes in Kosovo, there was a bombing campaign organized by NATO. And It ended basically a year of fighting that left 10,000 people dead, mainly ethnic Albanians. And nearly a decade later, after that NATO helped to stop that ethnic cleansing, Kosovo declared independence, unrecognized by Syria, but supported by NATO and under supervision of NATO's Kosovo Force, or KFOR. And it's really one of those moments where everybody said, oh, well, everybody saw there was a genocide going on, why did nothing happen? In this case, NATO did act, and it helped to save perhaps hundreds of thousands and millions of lives, but also helped to create a stable place for Kosovars to live, and that is Kosovo. So I'd like to start with my first question, talking about you and your past. A significant part of your past has been involved and dedicated to creating and leading the diaspora think tank that I mentioned, German. It's a crowdsourcing digital engagement platform to help promote Kosovo's statehood. Could you just tell me a little bit more and tell us here what that work meant to you, what it was like, and how it led you to politics, which obviously was not a direct route?
For sure, I think it goes back to the story of NATO. It starts with the 90s. I'm a child born in a refugee. And so growing up in a conflict society, growing up in a war, it's not an easy path in terms of how you see the future. What war does, the war, it builds resiliency. As a part of my journey through the Kosovo War, but also a refugee path, I have moved forward around the world to try to get myself equipped with skills so that I could contribute back to the country on my own in terms of building it and in terms of getting ahead in the state structures. So in that journey ahead, I've come to notice that there are so many people out there. Kosovo today has 1.7 million inhabitants in the country, but it has more living abroad, which it created a diaspora formation across the world. This is also a journey of our history, because since the 50s, 60s, and then the 80s when we had the political exile, and the 90s when we had a mass emigration, when people were displaced, close to 1 million Kosovars were forced to leave their homes. We've gone around the world, Canada included, opened doors to 7,000 refugees from Kosovo during 1998 war to be able to continue their living while they were looking and longing to go back home in that journey. So as part of this movement around the world, and as the quest to try to get back to home, I've come to notice that living in between has such a big power of building partnerships. And in this living in between, I've come to notice that there's so many people out there that have tremendous talent that they want to contribute. But often countries at home, they worry too much about domestic politics daily and into their daily policies, not necessarily so much about the people that go abroad, because they're a bit further and not so much heavy in terms of the voting part. And so when it comes to that part, I've come across Albanian Americans, Canadian Americans, Canadian citizens of origin of Kosovo, or Canadians who were born here, whose parents are from Kosovo, where they were looking for ways to get back. And that's when we realized that there is quite a dynamic diaspora that we've built through this journey of being a country in making, being a territory where our rights were constantly being stripped out, the discrimination was systematically, but I also realized the power of community. During the 80s, when there was a political exile out of Kosovo, where mainly ethnic Albanians were leaving the homeland, a lot of cancellaries around the world opened doors to hear people's thoughts and what was going on. At the time, there was no social media. At the time, there were individual connections that made the difference. If it wasn't for Canadian Albanians, Albanian Americans, we perhaps wouldn't have been here today. Our story, in many ways, is connected to the people who knocked on the doors to tell our reality, because there wasn't much media attention at the beginning as our right was stripped. But along with it, when Milosevic's regime decided to stop the education system, our community that was living abroad has basically stepped in to provide a parallel education system by supporting the structures in Kosovo with 3% of their income earnings, which was to me very powerful in understanding how is it possible that you can live in between, but you are so focused on helping that part of it. And it goes back to origin, it goes back to who we are, why we do what we do, and how we can make that difference at home. And so through that, I realized that there's so many people around the world that are connected to Kosovo in one way or another. While we have now embassies and consulates since Declaration of Independence in 2008, I would say that Kosovo had ambassadors way before it had a country. And so in this journey, I learned how much there is wealth on the network of people that we have around the world. And I've worked closely with them to try to find ways of how do we navigate that in between in terms of policies. How do we make policies that help promote both the diaspora, which is this critical mass living abroad, and Kosovo at the same time. Diaspora, precisely because when we talk about migration, including in this year that is going to be a year of elections in almost 80 countries, migration is so negative in so many aspects of it. But diaspora is like this best cousin of migration. It's associated with a lot of positive stuff. And so how do we turn that? And that's where I got very keen and began to advocate for Kosovo's diaspora right, for the right to vote, for the right to be politically active, and for their rights to be engaged within our economy more present. Because 14% of our GDP is based on financial remittances in diaspora center. The reason that Pristina Airport is the second largest busy airport in Southeast Europe is because we have diaspora community who every summer, without a doubt, made Kosovo a place of destination. You would say, how is it possible that a country that has no sea has 4 million visitors during the summer? It's because our people come home, and in many ways, they use their time to reconnect, to give back, but most importantly, to build on their roots. So in this process, I've come across a French author, Emile Zola. Zola talked about, basically, on the post-Second World War, how societies need to grow and how it's important for us not to think just for oneself, but for the community, that if we want to move ahead, it shouldn't just be good for me. It has to be good for you as well, because we need to co-create that journey. And so Zola argued about French miners at the time and how we have to give people rights and how the mining industry then began to shift. But the term that he used, a novelist called Germinal. And I thought when we begin this journey of building an organization, what should we put the name on? Because the name has representation. A lot of people in our culture is like build names that affiliate directly with the country. It's like Albania, Kosovo, Besa Bes. There's few other very typical sayings. But Germinal was more of like building the cadre of next generation leaders, Canadian Kosovars, Canadian Albanians who could come back and reconnect to their roots and be equally fitting and good enough for both places. So that's how Bermin began, and through advocacy work, we began the work in 2010 when there was only close to 10,000 voters from abroad.
Right.
Constitution of Kosovo allows citizens of Kosovo abroad to vote. In fact, it allowed even non-citizens of Kosovo, because in a post-war Kosovo, when we built the structure, we wanted to make sure that minorities felt included. We built a multi-ethnic society that thrives on engaging every citizen. And so that was a right that you could still, even if you were not a citizen, you could fill the paperwork and be able to exercise your right to vote. But striking enough, out of 10,000, there were almost close to zero Albanian abroad voting, because they just simply first and foremost, didn't know. They felt like, okay, Kosovo's liberation took place, we have now a country, now we have a government, we have to step up, we've done our job, we have to step out. But they are citizens of Kosovo, they're dual citizens. And so that we begin to engage with them to mainly promote their right to vote, but also promote their civic engagement. That regardless where you live, you have a chance to input and to give your vision. And that's how fast forward actually in this current government. We had close to 200,000 diaspora voters.
Congratulations.
And we're keen to help Kosovo.
From 10,000 to 200,000, that's
It's been
quite a good record.
Quite a journey, so yeah.
Well, congratulations. And they vote through the embassy or through the consulate?
Yeah, for the first time we have just put forward the legislation that actually allows diaspora to vote in embassies and consulates, allows them to mail their ballot to the embassies and consulate, but also allows them to mail their ballots in Kosovo. So there is a variety of options But the key part is not just the voting piece. Voting is one element of your journey. To be an active citizen, to be able to provide feedback on the legislations, to be able to stay engaged, to be able to criticize them, because you mentioned very rightly so, democracies are not just born right away. Democracies are a struggle of connecting with one another, of pushing one another, and of being front as to what's possible, and making sure that we learn the lessons in the journey. And that's the beauty of democracies, because we grow together. We don't just follow, we sort of collaborate to build it forward.
Very true. And obviously Canada is a country of diasporas as well. We've had this issue of how does that kind of dual citizen or that idea that you have two homelands, how does that work? And we're continuing to work through it, but I think it does all do us good to hear about those constant stories of contributions of our diasporas to Canadian life and citizenship. So I'd like to start some conversations about Kosovo's challenging history and inspiring history and how that relates to today. It's particularly a pleasure to host you on the 75th anniversary at a time when NATO is more important than it perhaps ever has been in the past. And of course we have so much that's causing us concern in the greater world. And the existence and history of Kosovo reminds us of the remarkable success that Canada and our NATO allies can have through collective effort, as I mentioned. And I thought it would be wonderful, because NATO has such a large role in the creation of Kosovo, could you just tell us a little bit about what NATO means to you and to Kosovo?
I believe I speak for most people in Kosovo, and every single Kosovar have gone through a conflict. For us, NATO means peace of today, but future security. I don't think anyone can fathom the essence of NATO's presence in our life. Kosovo is a success story of NATO. I mean, this year is the 25th anniversary of NATO, liberation of Kosovo, which culminated a decade-long apartheid that ended up with a genocidal war and regime of Milosevic. People in Kosovo, I've said, they begin to be stripped out of their rights and their liberties, and then the culmination was genocide. And living in that part of the world where we've had previous never again stories with Srebrenica in '95, and then continuation with Kosovo, and still living in a region where you have the key aggressor not for a moment come forward to apologize, it brings a lot to process for the society. NATO represents in many ways the power of partnerships for good deeds. And if it wasn't for NATO, again, we wouldn't be here. I grew up wishing that NATO would be present as we were going through the conflict. And today I continue to live on a gratitude for every single soldier who would come to serve in our country. If it wasn't for their contribution, we wouldn't be here. And that contribution has changed the trajectory of who we are and what we do. Today, Kosovo is an upper middle income country with the strongest democratic indicators in the region. My colleagues and I have been not just blessed by the opportunity to build the partnerships, but also to grow in this partnership, to be able to allow, through the partnership alliance, although we're not a NATO member, we aspire to be a NATO member, because we believe that NATO is a sole source of our security, but also our presence. Because when you live in a region where somebody doesn't have an issue with you, has an issue with your being, with your existence, then everything changes in your trajectory. When you're lucky to have neighbors that don't look to you on an aggressive level, but living in a country where you have a neighbor that constantly tries to annex you, your life trajectory shifts and the security becomes a key dominant of the importance. But NATO's success story of intervention in Kosovo to stop Serbia's genocidal war in 1998-1999 in many ways is an integral part of Kosovo's story. But alongside being an integral part of our story, we believe that for NATO, Kosovo is an integral part of the story as well, because often the alliance gets questioned on interventions. But NATO's intervention in Kosovo is so successful to a point that the Russian MFA every other day questions and tries to draw comparison between the annexation in Donbass and Crimea versus Kosovo. But the truth is that the reason NATO intervened in Kosovo is because genocide was taking place. And the annexation on the basis of just wanting to grab more land, it's not what the Kosovo case was. So in this aspect, NATO, all in all, means stability and peace. And the moment that you are present, often it gets taken for granted, but it's always good to remind ourselves that it's NATO who could keep us more secure. And after Russia's unjust invasion of Ukraine, I think for the longest time, democratic societies, particularly in Europe, have taken the security line as very much for granted. And now we've woken up, now having Finland and Sweden, two countries, become part of the alliance. We've come to realize the importance of the alliance, but also the importance of building trust, knowing that we have each other back.
And being ready for it, more than anything else. I mean, so a lot of Canadians don't necessarily understand the idea of deterrence that is the basis of NATO, but just being ready with your friends to say that when push comes to shove, we will all be there together. And it's the togetherness that matters. Before the Second World War, many different countries had bilateral agreements that they would protect. Poland, for instance, various other countries. And until Poland was invaded by the Nazis, those treaties were not necessarily obeyed because they were bilateral and people were not willing to go in alone. The whole point of NATO is that we all pledge together, and that's what makes it different. The preponderance, the weight, the gravity of so many people together being willing to stand up and say, not on our watch. So I love to hear kind of what NATO means to you, and so I would like to talk a little bit about KFOR itself. So what is NATO doing now, and what has it continued to do? Not only did it help stop the actual ethnic cleansing, but it created a force to keep peace. They are considered NATO peacekeepers, although that doesn't always sound right to a lot of people. So the heavy lifting in the creation of the country and its eventual independence in 2008 was achieved by Kosovars, of course. But KFOR itself started in a very large role. So it's changed. In 1999, KFOR began as a NATO mission under UN resolution with 50,000 troops on the ground. The security environment, of course, has changed over the years. Changed to 26,000, then 17,000, and eventually 4,000 at the beginning of 2023. Can you just give us a sense of how KFOR has been used and viewed in Kosovo from your point of view?
As I mentioned before, I think it's important to draw on the build-up. Kosovo has been built through the NATO alliance, but has been also a democratic state with the highest impact factors in terms of democracy. We are, as people, defined by human rights factors within our country. We pride ourselves on domestic and foreign policy on the democratic values. And that to say, this past 1 year, we've improved 20 numbers on the Index of Transparency International. We have become recognized by World Justice Index as the most improved country in terms of justice in 2022. These factors relate to our story of resilience. I think if there is something in this journey is that I am yet to find a community that builds so much resiliency, but also uses the challenges that are ahead and turns them into opportunity. For us, NATO and KFOR mission that has been present in Kosovo since day one has been viewed as number one territorial stabilizing factor of our border, of our reality. On a day-to-day basis, NATO's presence through KFOR mission is security purposes solely and only to keep peace and stability in the region. And as I mentioned earlier, when you have a neighbor who, despite your reality, and who constantly tries to destabilize and bring influences, malign influences in your territory, then you become very cautious. Often in this aspect, when we as Kosovars talk, we associate so much with the Baltic countries, because when you have an aggressive neighbor, then your journey begins to shift in terms of the mindset. So I think NATO has played a vital role in not just in sort of making sure that rule of law, democracy, and stability in the country is present, but it's also in securing our border. That's one of the biggest contribution of NATO. But the other one is capacity building. It's partnership. It's co-deployment. Now, 25 years post-war in Kosovo, I'm proud to say that we are no longer as Kosovo just consumer of the resources, but we are in a position to be contributors. We've co-deployed in Kuwait, we have other co-deployment in process with United Kingdom in Belize. We have begun to support the democratization processes, because when I say on a foreign policy, we also have the Ukrainian soldiers being trained on the demining centers in Kosovo. We begin as a small country to contribute into the operation Interfax now in training Ukrainian soldiers. And so it's been a journey of learning, owning the learning process, and now being able to provide to others, to build it forward. On this aspect, the contribution that KFOR has made is, not just this past 25 years, but particularly last year and this year, it's allowing us to deter aggression.
So shall I get into that?
Yeah,
of course.
We can definitely.
Because that makes a great intro to talk about last year. And it is nice to hear that it was both, obviously, KFOR symbolic and deterrence, but also active as well. So I'm not sure how much of last year's news in Kosovo you all may have seen, but there was a lot going on. And you'll excuse me if I kind of refer to my notes here, but exploring the growing tensions on the Serbian border in 2023, there was a lot going on. In April and May of 2023, there's more history, but in April and May of 2023, ethnic Serbian Kosovars boycotted local elections in the north and subsequently protested the Albanian Kosovar mayors who were elected as a result of boycott. Not a surprising result there, but the violence that resulted led to 93 KFOR troops being injured, along with local police. When you see some of the videos there, it's a very touch and go situation. Looks very, very worrying. At the same time, though, Serbia put their troops on the highest alert, raising tensions even more. So you'll imagine, with all of the effort that's gone into creating Kosovo as a pocket of peace and helping to make sure the Balkans maintain their stability, this was a very bad news during a very bad year already in 2023, with so much else going on. The United States and the EU were extremely concerned about this worrying change, as you might imagine, and counseled restraint on both sides, as always. However, the US and EU were critical of Kosovo's move to access the municipal buildings involved in the north there by force and escalating the local situation thereby. Kosovo did work to lower tensions after this and made plans to facilitate new local elections. And that was in April and May. But a few months later, in September of 2023, there was the worst escalation of violence seen in the region for decades, since the establishment of KFOR, essentially. A group of ethnic Serbian gunmen attacked a Kosovar police convoy in the north, killing one officer and injuring a few more. The gunmen then fled to a Serbian Orthodox monastery that had a bit of a weapons cache and a few other things. That was surrounded and eventually captured by Kosovar police. The briefing note sent by the Kosovar government to explain the situation identified this act as being supported by Serbia itself and exhibiting the kind of hybrid techniques that had been exhibited in the invasion of Crimea. Not surprising from a lot of people who've been watching the situation. At the same time, more worrying indications were seen by the United States, with their eyes in the sky, seeing a big buildup on the Serbian border of tanks, artillery, heavy infantry, etc., in the same way that had been seen on the borders of Ukraine before their invasion, before the Russian invasion, of course. So as a result of this added concern, KFOR has been strengthened with several hundred more troops from the UK and other countries as well. and the NATO Secretary General had a visit in November, 4 days to the region. It really signifies his concern about what's going on, I think, in the region, and of course all the different members of NATO as well. I'd just like to know, Deputy Minister, your overall assessment of the current situation. Obviously that's a lot, and for those who have not been informed about it yet, I apologize for just throwing that out to you, but I'd like to get your opinion on the current situation and hear a bit more about the threat that you see to regional stability between Kosovo and Serbia.
Sure. I think I also want to make it a bit simple for the people who don't necessarily have the full picture on that part of the world. Kosovo, a country that declared independence in 2008, that Serbia put forward an ICJ question that they declared independence unilaterally in violation of international law. Fast forward, that answer was brought forward by ICJ. We got the clarity that we had the right to declare independence. 1998, 1999, the war and genocide that took place in Kosovo was the base to bring the United Nations mission in Kosovo under the Resolution Security Council 1244. That to say, during the war, we had Serbian military presence inside the country. But after the war, when they were pushed out of NATO, they remained around our border. Today, we have 48 forward operation bases of Serbian military army across our border. And one of the reasons why actually we need NATO's presence, NATO's continued engagement in the region, is to make sure that we continue to be alert of 48 forward operation bases that are around our border. The question is forward to who and for what?
Right.
Kosovo has no plan to go to war with anyone. The question is, what are those 48 forward operation bases taking place, being very active, and being constantly built up? It's important to understand the reality of the region also in terms of where we stand. Kosovo, Serbia, and the region, be it Bosnia-Herzegovina, which you also hear every once in a while about the current situation, North Macedonia, Montenegro, Albania, Bulgaria, you name it. So when you look this part of the world, and you look at the issues, one problem that is predominant in our part of the world is you have constant rise of authoritarian regimes that are taking place. Today, Serbia is no longer a democracy, but somehow, magically, it continues to be a partner, and it's actually part of the PFP. It's part of the Partnership for Peace in NATO. It's a country who is the only country in Europe, after Belarus, that has put zero sanction on Russia. On a country, after Russia's unjust invasion of Ukraine, Serbia became a very clear proxy of Russia in the region, because it was a good wake-up call of ways to destabilize the region. It has always been a partner of Russia. It has always worked closely with Russia. It has continued to sell and to purchase armament from Russia, although its funding comes 90% from European taxpayers and is a candidate member for the European Union. That to say, it also has built a strong partnership with China. China in the region, through the Red and Belt Initiative, has invested in 179 projects, according to the Balkan Investment Report. Within this 179 projects of engagement, we are talking about critical infrastructure. We're talking about presence of projects that penetrate deep into our society. The only country in the region that has not received any Chinese spending is Kosovo. And we made that clear because our sort of geostrategic position is very crystal clear. We want to be part of Euro-Atlantic integration. We belong to the European Union, and we see ourselves as part of this alliance. Meanwhile, our neighbor plays at the same time with all friends and partners. They are good for Chinese investment. They continue to buy armament from Iran. In fact, they constantly showcase this build-up of bilateral relations with Serbia and Iran. They are the sole determinant of malign influences present in the region. Jointly with Russia in 2017, they have plugged a center in Niš called Humanitarian Center everybody in the region, but also beyond the region, knows that that is a surveillance spy center that aims on a daily basis to redraw the narrative of the Balkans. Also, RT has a presence in Serbia.
I did want to ask a little bit
Yeah.
more about that.
It builds up. So to give you this, you have this build up, and as the invasion in Ukraine began, Serbia became more aggressive to Kosovo. For a longest time, that's what I said earlier, they've never apologized. But not only they never apologized, for the past 25 years, they have been in a journey of revisionist history, of trying to undo the narrative of what they've done. Not only they never accepted the reality, they never come to terms with reality, because it's easy to say, but you should reconcile. Everybody wants to reconcile, because in order to move forward, we want to make sure the young generations have a clarity of what has happened in the past. We don't just want to move forward, we want to understand what has happened. For the never again to never take place, we really have to be cautious of what has happened so that we can prevent. And build up of it, it's very important to understand how they became to be much more aggressive. They've been aggressive since day one. But NATO's presence has been the sole deterrence. But along with NATO's presence, Kosovo's security forces, which has a 10-year transition plan, and Kosovo's police forces have become the agents of change for our security structures. That to say, they have built up, and I said earlier, our people are resilient, and the challenges that come along with them, they turn them into opportunities. So in this journey, our security sector has benefited tremendously from partners such as Canada, UK, US.
There are 27 members of KFOR, right?
For sure.
So it's a lot of 5 Canadians at the moment.
At the moment, and mainly in operation part, but we've had over 70,000 soldiers that come in now, and at the moment there's also close to 5,000 NATO member troops on the ground that are constantly on the borderline. But along with just presence, there is also this collaboration, this exchange of knowledge, this transfer of skills that is taking place. So that to say, your summary is largely accurate. But I said earlier, it's important to note that we are the most democratic countries in the Western Balkans. And as a result, you earlier talked about Serbs withdrawing from the institutions, which was directly influenced by Serbia. Serbia continuously tried to destabilize our country and the region through the interference of minorities. They don't like the Serbs to be integrated in Kosovo. They don't want the Serbs to feel equal as Serb Kosovars. But at the end of the day, we built a multi-ethnic state.
Can you go into that a bit more?
For a multi-ethnic state to exist, there's no, there shouldn't be an autonomy for any minority. Every citizen should feel welcomed, free, and feel equal as part of the journey. So I think when it came to this problem with mayors, which then later escalated into the attack against NATO soldiers, it's very simple. We had elections. We had 4 Serbian mayors, to make it very simple, withdraw from the institution. They did not agree with what was happening in the country, but so we called for election. International community fast forward came in and said, well, could you please postpone the elections because it's so important that the situation doesn't get fueled. We said, fine, we can postpone the election. We agreed to postpone the election. And the next round of the timing came. So fast forward in April, we had elections when people applied to be mayors of the city. So it happened that there was only one Serb until the last day of the election, sort of a ballot signage that we would continue with the election day. The only Serbian candidate was threatened to withdraw from the race. And we remained by the Serbian government and by the Serbian proxy population that they've built in terms of maintaining this parallel parallel structure of financing criminal activity in the country. The north of Kosovo, where a lot of these 4 mayors withdraw and had election. And so we had new elections. Out of 4 mayors, 1 of them is of Turkish background and 3 are Albanians. So on election day, there were not many people that went out to vote. So there is a mayor that has 100 votes. And so while the elections were fair, free and transparent, everybody greeted with a message. The time is done, so we have now a new elected mayor. And And after we had the new elected mayor, we had the international community asking us that if we could perhaps not score in the duly elected mayors in official buildings because it would build tension. I'm sorry, those were duly elected mayors, and you are asking us not to allow them to go to do their work. The proposal was that they could zoom in, they could work from another building. I mean, just for a moment, let's assume we are going to win a peg, and we say elections are done, there's mayors in multiple counties, they get elected. It doesn't matter how many people go out in election. That's the beauty of democracy. Even if it's one vote, if everybody had the right within that framework to go out vote, but only one person decided for the future of that county, good luck to this person that stood up. That's what democracy is. You stand up to build your institution. And if you don't like your politicians, well, the next time you go and vote, right? And so in this process, we understood that while the mayor did not have legitimacy, the others had zero. They didn't vote to vote at all. And so in this process, the mayors were sworn in. And
Can I clarify, were there any counter, like Serbian mayors or anything like that?
no, they weren't, but there was
Just sheer protest.
a militia group that was coordinated while Belgrade to build pressure. So as a result of this, we basically built up in terms of troops and security forces present, so the mayors could enter their office. There was actually a mayor that stayed in office over 5 months without leaving because of the security
In the physical
tensions in a
office.
physical office, without leaving the building. He was committed to stay and do his job within the building. As a result of it, on May 29, we had the clashes, which were some of the horror scene of what is possible
Mob, like-
in that part of the world. NATO, it took NATO 48 hours to react to what was happening, because it was just unimaginable that you would have the mob fighting the NATO troops because the Albanian mayor entered the building. Fast forward, in June 14, we had Serbia abducting 3 police officers deep inside our territory, and there wasn't much reaction because the key goal was to calm the tension. As a result of all this, the European Union went forward and put sanctions against Kosovo.
I believe the United States did.
No, it was European Union put practical sanctions of saying that we will not be able to meet high-level individuals, that we will postpone some of the funding. And then all this, while we continuously warned NATO members, our partners and allies, about the build-up military presence of Serbia, the purchasement of armament, and their constant illegal activity in the country. Fast forward, we come to September 24th, where we woke up to a news that a police officer, a Sergeant Afrin Bunyaku, was killed in the north of Kosovo in an attack by Serbian terrorist group. It was a direct act of aggression. We had close to 100 Serbian terrorists enter our territory, staged armament in the monastery when 45 monks were inside the building at 3 in the morning. And the plan was to annex the north part of Kosovo. The annexation plan became very clear fast forward because we had drone footage and we've seized all the armaments they left and the maps they left behind. As a result of Kosovo's professional response in terms of the security, and as a result of that mass troops that they were asking us, our presence was too big in number in the north, we managed to basically naturalize the terrorists within 3 hours. And 1 police officer was killed from Kosovo side, 3 terrorists were killed, and the rest escaped from the border. Fast forward, the next day, Serbia declared 3 days of mourning, national level, for the 3 terrorists that were killed. Basically, their key leader, which is named Milan Radojicic, which today walks freely in Serbia, went publicly and said he has orchestrated the attack and built and organized it. Most people that were part of the attack were folks who sit in the National Security of Serbia Council. So Milan Radojicic is the key leader that sits on the side of Vučić and is part of the council, were members of Serbian party in Kosovo who have 10% reserved votes within our parliament. We have 20 seats out of 120 for minorities, and within 20, 10 are reserved for Serbs. They are, at the moment, the party that also co-sponsored and organized, alongside with the Serbian government, that annexation plan, the direct aggression plan of Kosovo, sits in our parliament. They receive salary from our parliament on a monthly basis as MPs, but they never show up. They come in every 6 months, only to make sure that they don't get off the payment. So that to say, I want to bring it to the point where we understand what happened with the duly elected mayors. They are still in office, and in order to remove them from the office, we have a constitution and we have legal proceedings. So we said, we understand that the legitimacy is not there, and we are willing to go into re-election. But to go into re-election, you need to petition the mayors. You need to have 51% of the population to sign in order to send to the Central Election Committee so that we can have new election. At the moment, we are in a place where the petition is completed. The communities have sent forward to the Central Election Committee the signatures of the petition, and the moment the CEC finalizes this process, takes it to the President's office, and then if the legal constitutional rights are met, then we call on the new election. But the importance of this to understand is that the influence that Serbia tries to play in Kosovo through utilizing the Serbs by not allowing them to integrate, by using them as a source of destabilization, and by bringing narrative of malign influences into the territory. It's not just against Kosovo, it's against the regional stability. This problem is not just in Kosovo. This problem is in Montenegro. It's in Bosnia and Herzegovina. For example, Dodik threatening to do no respect of the Dayton Agreement and to move forward. So we have a neighbor that simply is part of PFP, wants to be a NATO member. I doubt it, because it's more like getting ahead in the process, receiving as much funding as possible, but their alliance is somewhere else. And the fact that they have not aligned with European Union or US sanctions against Russia, the fact that when the entire European Union had a no-fly zone to Russia, in Serbia flight triples between Moscow and Serbia, the fact that the Orthodox Church of Serbia is 150% aligned with the Orthodox Church of Russia, and they used Orthodox Church as a basis. The reason why the Paschal Monastery was staged on the place because it wanted to bring Kosovo to a point. Imagine you wake up in the morning and you saw that if one monk would have been killed on that attack, we would have been portrayed worldwide as Albanians wanting to cleanse the Serbs. Because this is the strategy that is currently on the Russian playbook, that we are trying to remove Serbs out of their territory. The truth is that just like anyone else, we work on a daily basis to integrate everyone. Minority or religion shouldn't be the basis of integration. It should be the civic engagement. You're just another citizen. You happen to have a different layer of identity, so do I. So we work every day to build this multi-ethnic Kosovo. And in order to build this multi-ethnic Kosovo, we also have to come to terms that sometimes you will have an Albanian mayor. Why? That's not a problem.
Can I ask a little bit more on that, on the whole, so Serbia is actively pushing Serbian Kosovars not to integrate more generally. So it's a kind of a constant campaign of, I guess, ethnic solidarity or something like that. I wanted to just move on to the negotiations that have continued over years now, the Ohrid agreement. So this is something to try to set up the northern Serb Kosovar community and give them some autonomy so that they might be a little more mollified as being part of Kosovo. So this was started quite a few years ago, and it's directed at the, 10 of the Serbian municipalities, most of which are in the north, but some are a little further south as well. Can you just talk a little bit about that accord and what are its prospects, and what kind of autonomy are we talking about in a general sense?
I think it's important to understand that we go back to 2011 when we began the negotiation with Serbia facilitated by the European Union. Since 2011, we have been in negotiation rounds with Serbia, from technical to political, and we've had a number of agreements that we've come forward. that not always sees the implementation.
But it is between
But it is between
Serbian-
Serbia and Kosovo, facilitated by the European Union. And fast forward, last February and March, we have struck a deal. We have agreed, we built forward a plan for normalization path between Kosovo and Serbia. And this has been the logic for quite some time, that we agree, and then Serbia goes publicly and says, yeah, but I don't like this, we disagree, right? So publicly, we have an agreement, and we have an agreement that is legally binding according to the European Union and United States. And when publicly said, for us, this is a legal binding agreement. The issue with the current agreement that we have, and the annex plan of the agreement, is that we haven't signed it. Because Serbia refused to sign the agreement, and the mediators allowed Serbia to go without signing the agreement, but still consider legal binding agreement. So fast forward, we have an agreement, and we have Serbia, who after we went publicly said we have an agreement, and after a number of rounds of negotiation, refused to accept the agreement. Because there are two articles that they say we are not going to accept it. And this is not just saying publicly. They have sent forward to the European Union Action Services, which is basically their Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the EU. They have sent a note that says this agreement in Britain, it's not legal binding for us, one, and two, we will never accept Article 4, which is basically the obligation of Serbia not to object to Kosovo's membership in international organization, and the obligation to respect Kosovo's territorial integrity,
which is pretty key.
Article 2. But to
which is so important for the United Nations idea of self-defense.
Exactly. It's a basis, but to make this agreement, Kosovo had to remove initially we begin on the negotiations saying that it's centered on mutual recognition. Serbia needs to recognize us. We are a new reality. They have to get to the terms. In their constitution, we still are as part of their territory. They need to remove that because the reality on the ground has changed. To come to Kosovo, Serbs need to have documentation. They pass through the borders just like any other citizen. And so we forged that, and we said, look, we are not looking for a formal de facto recognition, right? But all the articles are drawn that there will be, this was based on a two Germany model that was designed this agreement of coming forward to normalization. But in order to move ahead, we need both sides to agree. And
it looked like there was going to be an agreement tomorrow.
It's been the agreement is there. For us, we continue to be fully behind this basic agreement that we have in place. Our Prime Minister, just in October, had insisted that we sign the agreement, and he insisted 2 weeks after we had a direct aggression attack in our territory, and an annexation plan that took place. We still went ahead to the high-level meeting, and we said, oh yes, while the proposal on this agreement is not the most perfect one, we said, yes, we are willing to move forward, but we have to sign it. And the intermediaries had to convince Serbia to sign it. But Serbia refused to sign the agreement, and it sent this letter that they no longer recognize the agreement. So the question is, for the longest time, the international community has worked closely with Serbia to try to bring them and remove them from the Russian orbit. But it's safe to say now that it's this journey, and we would want that to happen. Look, everybody wants to have a peaceful neighborhood. We want Serbia to integrate into the European Union. It's so important because that's our aspiration. And if the region gets enlarged into the European Union, we shouldn't bring our problems to the European Union. We need to solve those bilateral problems and get ahead together to the European Union. But we cannot allow Serbia to play in these terms, that they can easily directly continue threats of aggression to another neighboring country. They continue to purchase armaments. They continue to sell armaments to some of the actors that build malign influence in the region. They continue to say that we want to be part of the EU, but we are not interested to align with European security and foreign policy. It's the only country that aspires to be in EU, but refuses to be part of European Union security and foreign policy. I mean, that's a basic part. If you want to be part of a family, you have to accept the values that the European Union brings. It shouldn't be just the money that the European Union brings. So at the moment, we are at a point where international community has to see the reality for what it is, not for what we wish to be. Because by not seeing the reality on ground for what it is, fast forward, we are at the point where Serbia believes that we are a temporary state. Because they say, look, the West, they build this anti-Western narrative on a daily basis through their humanitarian center. They continuously try to destabilize the region by mere acts of symbolism. I give you an example. For example, when we had the protests and the clashes in Kosovo, we had the donation MiG-29 that Belarus gave to Serbia flying around our territory, and the Russian ambassador coming alongside with the Serbian interior minister at the border. What was that? For what are these symbols? For what is the plan? And how is it possible that we are allowing Serbia to continue to buy time, despite the fact that they've shown over and over that they are not reliable partners? If September 24 attack, we have sent a report to all the parties. It's a 54-page report that explains on details how Serbia has financed, has allowed, has trained, and has organized everything that happened in Kosovo. We shared public intel information about how currently, as we talk, Serbia is preparing new grounds across on their 48 forward operation bases. They're training 150 people for sniper. They continuously build on the same terrorist group that allowed them to get into some pension schemes, continue to financially help us. And the person that came publicly, Milan Radojic, came publicly and said, I organized the attack, is roaming freely in Serbia, and is among the most, the richest business person in Serbia, among the top 100. He gets most of his funding through government contraction. It is present. So, in many ways, Kosovo has asked, and the partners have asked also to extradite Milan Radojic because he's a citizen of Kosovo. He happened to be the key organizers, but he also happened to be the vice president of Serbian party in Kosovo.
And I think all of the large brief that went out is what essentially moved NATO into action, bringing many more members of KFOR into Kosovo, and to make sure that the Secretary General spent 4 days in the region. And I'd like to actually open up the floor after one last question, but perhaps, Rizan, would you mind grabbing, we've got another mic here that Max can give you, and we can take some questions from the floor. But my last question, I'm cutting out a few just because I want to make sure we get to our audience. But I know I've been speaking with the ambassador and so many other representatives from the region. And apart from this immediate conflict with Serbia, which is dreadfully serious, what else do you see in the region that's concerning? Because you mentioned already Montenegro, you mentioned Bosnia-Herzegovina. Just could you characterize that a little bit more, and then we'll go to the audience for questions. I'm sure there's lots.
I think what's important to understand from that part of the world is, first and foremost, that this is not just Serbia and Kosovo.
Right.
Serbia is Russia's main proxy in the region. And Serbia's attempt is to destabilize the region through manipulating the local Serb population in Kosovo, Montenegro, in Bosnia-Herzegovina. And while we want all that Serbia gets removed from Russian orbit, we have to understand the Serbian and Russian connection. It's deeply rooted in cultural, religious connections. It's a relationship that goes on a different level. Today, 90% of Serbian population approve Russia versus European Union. So it's a bit scary to think that you have currently the approval rate for European Union by Serbian population is 34%.
And 90%.
And 96% in Kosovo. But that to say, this 96% of Kosovo that want to be part of the European Union should be given a path towards the future. We cannot wait and be held hostage because Serbia wants to be in the EU, but it doesn't want to be in the EU. So we have to understand the reality of what it is. We have Serbia who daily works to build the greater Serbia. They want to go back to what they lost as a territory. They want to get us back to the 90s on Yugoslav time when they were the upper part of everyone. And so in this part, their problem with our being is something that Serbia needs to solve. Our Prime Minister says best in many ways. He said Serbia needs to liberate itself from us. Serbian population needs to have a future in the democratic Europe, but Serbian government hasn't changed since 90s. I mean, it's also counterproductive to think that a person who was Milosevic's propaganda minister, which is current sitting president Alexander Vučić, can make a difference from its leader. So in Serbia, this past 25 years, the only thing that has changed is the backslide in democracy. Nothing else. The leadership remains the same, the key people remains the same, the constant build-up of a narrative, the toxicity. I mean, 90% of the media in Serbia is controlled by the government. There's like, if Vučić goes into TV, you see it in 48 different channels. He's present. The opposition that has also just gone on massive protests. And within Serbia, I have to say, it's also important to distinguish Serbian government from Serbian people. Serbian people are not the problem. Serbian government is the problem. The elite that is trying to keep its people hostage. You have massive protests across Serbia of people wanting to change their government. You had election fraud. You had the OSCE report that clearly say how there was a mass voter buy-in from other parts of the region where the government brought in people out from outside of the country to vote for them. It was scandal. But still, Vučić remains in power. And Vučić is the only source in Serbia. I give you here an example. When international community comes to Kosovo, they meet the president, the prime minister, the opposition, the civil society, the Serbian minority. They talk to a whole spectrum of people. But when they go to Serbia, they only meet Vučić. Because Vučić is the only one person they talk to. And so I think here, for the future, is we have to reflect on the region. We have, if the only reason you would say Montenegro made it through some of the biggest crises in its history is because it was a NATO member.
Right. Attempted assassination.
The only reason that the Bosniaks continue to fight on a daily basis for their rights is because we have someone like Dodik who was declared non grata by the United States, still being part of the whole leadership and manipulating on a daily basis our reality. All this is happening on a similar playbook. It's a Russian playbook copy. Russia had the problem with the existence of the Ukrainian identity, not with the territories. So in this place, Serbia has the problem with our existence. And it will continue to work towards destabilizing us. It will continue to leverage every opportunity they have to make sure that they annex more of our territory. So that's why our future in NATO is crucial.
Right.
That we are no longer just talking about PFP. We are talking about the NATO membership. At the moment we have a temporary base, the non-steel camp of the US present in our country. But in order for us to move forward, we have to have a proper transition, a 10-year plan of Kosovo security forces. And we also have to continue to build up. That's why this past 2 years, we have raised the defense budget for 100%. 100% increase on the defense budget. Because we have a neighbor who does not understand that we are there to stay. And we are not temporary.
Certainly a vote for security. Canadians, I don't think we're going to be voting for something similar. Please, sir. We've got the microphone. Razan, if you don't mind.
Can you expand a little bit about Montenegro in Bosnia, and perhaps Macedonia? You've mentioned them, but you haven't talked about their governments and their recognition of Kosovo, for example.
Yeah. Out of the countries in the region, Bosnia-Herzegovina and Greece does not recognize Kosovo. So we have within the European Union, we have 5 EU member states, being Spain, Greece, Cyprus, Slovakia, and Romania that don't recognize Kosovo as a country. And then in the region, we have Bosnia-Herzegovina, who does not recognize our reality. Or we have a Bosniak minority within a country. In fact, Kosovo's deputy prime minister is of Bosniak minority on this multi-ethnic society that we are building. The region, the way this relationship is working is very simple. Serbia has Serbs in every country in the region. But also Serbia's Orthodox Church plays a very political role, I would say, in the region. And within that framework, every time the local Serbs try to integrate into the society, Serbia has built leverage over them. For example, there is Serbian parties in Kosovo, in Montenegro, in Bosnia-Herzegovina. They run into local election, and then they get controlled by Vucic. I said we have 10 MPs of Serbia in the parliament. So does Montenegro, Bosnia-Herzegovina. They have Serb MPs as well that come from Serbian parties. But these parties then get controlled and report back to Belgrade. It's a technique that they've used to make sure to maintain the interference and the structures within the societies. Not only do they support and promote them as Serbian leaders, right? But they also finance. For example, in Kosovo's case, you have people who are paid by our taxpayers' money. For parallel to the salary they get from our taxpayers' money, they get a salary from the Serbian government for the activity they do on behalf of Serbia in Kosovo. And so in this process, Serbia tries to monopolize their engagement and tries to control their engagement. And it uses for its benefits. It uses to expand power. It uses to bring the influence in the region, but it also uses to destabilize. You would say that the reason what was staged in Kosovo was as a format of sort of removing the focus on other parts of the world, because you want to sidetrack, right, what has happened in Ukraine, and by destabilizing the Balkans, in many ways you're destabilizing the European Union at a different level, because you're not only you're opening another front, and you're opening another front in the region that has quite intersectional history in terms of what it means to be X, Y, and Z, but it's also our realities are interfering with the European Union. Most of our population lives in the EU. I mean, close to 1 million Kosovars live in Germany. Close to 500,000 Serbians live in Germany. So it's our connection to European Union. We are present there physically as well in number of people. So this open front is to divert the attention to the region on a different end. Here is also when you look how Serbia is seeking to destabilize the regions through the Orthodox Church, it gives the elements of control that are not new to us. They are sort of resemblance of what has happened in the past. So I think there is the key element is how come that we have allowed Serbia to buy time for so long? How come that we have allowed Serbia to continually interfere? And how come that we know, we have facts, we know, in fact Lord Cameron in a briefing in the House Foreign Affairs Committee said, we know that Serbia is Russia's proxy. The question is, what can we do? How are we willing to engage Serbia? And what does it take to get Serbia closer to the European Union?
It does sound very much like the conversations we were having about Russia before 2014 and after 2014.
Yeah, I mean, you've had people argue that Minsk I and Minsk II were the progress, right? Because we wanted to sell on something, and then fast forward, we come to realize, okay, but we cannot rely so much. And so in many ways, we've had lessons learned, but when it comes to being able to practice them, it's where we failed. And I would say this past 25 years, we've learned a lot of lessons. But despite the fact that Serbia's attack of annexation happened in Kosovo, they haven't gotten a single sanction. Aside from some public condemnation and private tough talk, so to say. But I don't know where that can get us.
I'd like to ask any other questions in the back, and then in the middle there afterwards.
Oh, yeah,
Perhaps
sorry.
we'll do a 2-2. So Adam, if you could then pass it to the middle afterwards.
Sure, sounds good. So I'm Živinović with the National Post. I'm ethnically Serbian, but very pro-NATO. I was in North Mitrovica back in the autumn of 2022 interviewing local Serbian Kosovar civil society actors about what life is like there. And they had mentioned, a lot of frustration with the fact they don't actually get to express themselves politically because Serbian line dominates that space. And anyone who tries to create a different Serbian party that can be independent from Belgrade, you're subject to intimidation. Cars are burned, people are threatened with murder, or are actually sometimes killed. One guy mentioned that he witnessed, or his associates witnessed, Serbian line officials actually stuffing ballot boxes, right? So you would mention with the mayors that this was like a free and fair election, but it seems like elections in Serbia and Mitrovica are not actually free and fair. So what more can Kosovo do to protect Serbian Kosovars from Belgrade's influence and ensure that they can actually express themselves politically?
And then we'll just go to the middle as well here.
Thank you very much for your time. I just wanted to ask what your thoughts are on the future of KFOR within Kosovo. The number of troops have reduced significantly from the time that it started, like 50,000, now we're about close to 5,000. Do you envision the force being there long term, considering all the things you pointed out with Serbia, or do you envision perhaps moving to a Kosovo armed forces, which I know has been somewhat contentious and NATO doesn't recognize that prospect officially?
Look at Adam, right?
Yes.
You're right in your perspective of what the Serbs are going through. I think it's important here to note that Serbs don't live in the north of Kosovo only. I live in Zilan, which is a city in southeast of Kosovo, close to Parteš, Raniluk, Klokot, Silova, Gračanica. Serbs coexist with Albanians without a single problem there. The problem with minorities, and it goes back to gentleman's question about but what is happening in the region as well, is because it goes to the part that when it comes to minority and when it comes to Serbian minority, there is no plurality in terms of elections. We have one Serbian party, period. We used to have multiple Serbian parties in Kosovo that have gotten 1 MP, 2 MP, 3 MP, but Vučić that built this Lista Srpska manipulated the process and got Lista Srpska to have 10 MPs. And ever since, there was any other member to be able to build the party. But within Kosovo's government, Nenad Rašić, which is a Serb, served as a minister in our government. He's not member of Srpska Lista. He's had his parties. He's had his family intimidated on a number of cases just because he's a Serb that wants to integrate into Kosovo. The 500 police that withdrew from Kosovo's institution, they got into our institution as part of an agreement through the European Union dialogue. In 2013, Kosovo and Serbia agreed that for better prospects of the integration of minorities, we have to integrate Serbs into our security structures. And as a result of this agreement, we've integrated 500 Serbs in the structures. These 500 Serbs then were begun to control by Belgrade, and when they were asked to leave, they had no choice. They just resigned because Vučić told them to do so. And they resigned because the idea was, in November when they resigned, to build more pressure on Kosovo to deliver on this association of Serb municipal minorities. The idea is that what they're asking is that the Kosovo government allows minority Serbs to have executive power. I'm sorry, we have a constitution, which is the constitution when it comes to guarantee minority rights, in Kosovo, to change the constitution, you need 2/3 of the minorities, not just 2/3 of the parliament. In Kosovo, to change the vital law, today to change the education law for primary education, without the Serbian approval, the approval of Serbian MPs, we cannot do that, right? And when we talk about institutions, we have Albanian and Serbian being official language. When we talk about integration, there is a positive discrimination when it comes to employment of minority. There is a number of Serbian citizens that work in Kosovo's institution and sometimes just don't show up. You know, we had in the Ministry of Local and Regional Structures, we had 120 Serbs integrated into the structure. 120 of them got paid for 15 years without showing up at work, just because they were Serbs. Because the agreement was that we were trying to integrate them. But if we're trying to integrate them, we work together. I cannot just pay taxpayers' money because you're Serbian. You cannot get taxpayers' money just because you're Albanian. But then you have the regular Serbs who are in big trouble. They are in between of an organized crime group that is backed by Serbia and by Srpska Lista. Milan Radojic was a vice president of Serbian List. You know, when the attack happened in the north, what was shocking for Serbian community was the amount of lavish life that these people were living. Because when we got through the north in terms of what they left behind, then the government had seized some of the villas, some of the properties that were illegal, all that life, all that they lived. You know, they had in Ujman Lake, Radojic had built a villa that is on the land of Kosovo's government land, right? He built the villa, he controlled the area, he lived a very lucrative life there. And that was a representation on behalf of Serbs who barely could make it in their living. So the Serbs that then they begin to engage get threatened. We just had an open call for policemen because we had the withdrawal of other Serb police. And we had a call to get new police officers. Some of the new police officers from Serbian minority that dared to apply and got admitted had to withdraw due to the pressure. Either their cars were burned, their families were intimidated, they were threatened because they constantly get fed on this narrative that by integrating you're betraying the country of Serbia. And here I think the international community doesn't put more pressure on Serbia to say, look, you cannot do this. Helsinki Committee report on annual basis brings forward the violations of human rights that Serbia commits, but there's very little. So to that point, what Kosovo can do is work harder to integrate minorities. But you also have to understand that we don't just have Serbian minority. You know, sometimes I tell my counterpart, I say, look, when they talk about minority, they go straight to Serbians. I say, look, do you know that we also have Roma, Ashkani, and Egyptian?
I believe we've also got the Turkish consul general here as well. Of course, excuse me.
Would you care to know about Turkish minority, the Bosniak minorities? There's other minorities that live in Kosovo. It's not just Serb. And here, I think it's important to understand that we cannot view any community as independent or autonomous within the Republic of Kosovo. If we are building a multi-ethnic society, we should provide for all. And I understand that if you are starting at 0 and I'm starting at 100, we have to have mechanisms of positive discrimination into place. We have quota system when it comes to gender. If it wasn't for, quota system, perhaps on the first year of our parliament, you will only see men. But fast forward, these quotas no longer are necessary because in the last election, we had every single woman MP that is part of the parliament won the seat. It was not given because they were women. It was the one part. And here, aside from us trying to engage more, our trouble is to be able to build public discourse with Serbs. The ones that talk to us are afraid to go publicly with us because they get interfered. If I go to talk to in a public discussion with young people of Serbia, the next thing you hear, they've been interrogated, they've stopped in the border, they've been asked as to why you're participating in this event, who is organizing it. So they are in trouble. And here is where we need to pressure Serbia not to interfere in the matters of citizens of another country.
Deputy
Because
Minister,
that's not
I'm cognizant of the time. Perhaps just mention about KFOR.
I will go back. NATO's presence is not just important, but it's crucial, not just for Kosovo, but for the security of the region. While KFOR has doubled down in numbers, our security forces have begun to rise. Here is where we see ourselves. We see ourselves as a contributor to NATO's structure. We see ourselves as member of NATO, and we continue to build on our capacities. Because I believe that with time, capacities of NATO are not always so, they shouldn't be only kept in our place, right? There will be need elsewhere. But on this journey, NATO's presence is necessary. And we have actually, due to what has happened, we've had multiple NATO members send additional troops. Just last night, Moldova announced that they are sending a contingent of 40 people. And then we had United Kingdom send a contingent of 300 people. We had the US. So because of what has happened, while we had basically a drop on the numbers, we begin to see a rise again in the numbers because we need to make sure that we have NATO in the borderline so that we could deter the ongoing activity that is taking place by Serbia.
Well, and part of the whole reason that we're thrilled to have you here, Deputy Minister, is to make sure Canadians are aware of this. We'll be following up with some publications as well, but how difficult is it for us to imagine a rogue organization within Canada kind of committing these outrages and intimidating in the same way that the Kosovars have to deal with? It is something that's worth bearing in mind. We've obviously had our own problems and still do with our own minorities. The Quebecois specifically here comes to mind, but also our indigenous population. But right now, this is happening in Kosovo. And so that is one of the reasons I'm quite pleased at the Secretary General's response, coming to Kosovo and the rest of the region to make sure that they realize, although there is so much going on, NATO's eye is on the region, and to maintain stability is really one of the main goals of NATO. So, Deputy Minister, I think we'll cut it at that. But thank you so much for joining us. I hope you'll be able to stay. We do have a lunch in a few minutes, but hopefully we can have a few more questions if there are some in the audience.